Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I am your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. He is Colin Camper. You can catch him running our Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Our third man in the booth, Billy Brandt. He's out sick this week. Colin was sick last week. Now Billy got it, so he's out this week. But we are here on Beyond the Cage this week. Huge week in MMA. Three of the major organizations here in the United States are having fights, as Bellator, World Series of Fighting, and the UFC are all having events this weekend after none of them having a fight last weekend. So it really makes up for last weekend's lack of action, and not to mention a lot of stuff in the headlines to cover this week, Colin, as well.
Yeah, no, it's been a long week without anything, especially since I was out sick last week and there wasn't much going on. And, so it's nice to move up to the second chair, though, and everything, and get this show running and everything. I'm excited.
All right, let's start, I guess, with the two big free agents that the UFC had pending, that being former Strikeforce and K1 champion Alistair Overeem, and of course, we've had him on the show here a couple times, the Funk Master, friend of the show, Aljamain Sterling, was also had his contract up. Now, unlike former UFC champion Ben Henderson, these two gentlemen decided to stay with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and I don't know, both I kind of had a feeling might go to Bellator, but if I had to be honest, I thought Sterling more so than Overeem. And for Overeem, I don't think it was a money thing. I don't think Bellator was going to get him that much more money. He was already getting paid a lot by the UFC. And I think Overeem this time around, because I think he could have went to the UFC before he went to Strikeforce. I think he could have went there years ago. I think that's kind of a knock on him, maybe a knock like on Nick Diaz or Uriah Faber, where it's like, yeah, you won a belt in another organization, but you haven't done it in the UFC. And I think desperately he wants to become a UFC champion to prove everybody that he is one of the best fighters to ever come in the sport. And by getting that UFC championship, it kind of validates his career and validates his legacy, that if he can go down not only as a K1 champion, not only as a Strikeforce champion, but as a UFC champion, there's no doubt that you can't put him in one of the elite group of heavyweights when his career is all said and done.
Definitely. I'm actually kind of glad he stayed in the heavyweight division. Really needs someone like him in there. I know he had that string of losses, which it made everyone like, oh no, like it's this Overeem thing, like is he really past his prime? But he's really turned it around. He's really kind of tightened up his game a little bit better to kind of hang with UFC caliber heavyweights. And I don't know, I'm really excited for it. The rumor that his first match might be Arlovsky over in Europe and everything. Some people are saying, oh, they train together, but we'll see. I'm just excited because right now that top five looks really good. Overeem was a very good backbone for that. So, I mean, even if we get him in for Doom eventually at some point, I would be ecstatic.
Of course, with Overeem having a win over the current UFC champion as well. So after he signed with the UFC, I'm not, according to MMA Junkie, I'm not seeing numbers in terms of an amount, but I can't imagine being that much different than
what was the first one? It was like 300K.
Yeah,
like
so
yeah.
I got to imagine it's around the same numbers. And also that he announced that not only does he have a fresh deal, he will be headlining in his home country of the Netherlands for the UFC's first trip to Holland at UFC Rotterdam. No opponent has been named for Alistair Overeem, but like you said, perhaps Orlovsky is an opponent. Perhaps maybe a dark horse, Cain Velasquez could be.
That would be interesting.
Could be a dark. He already had his surgery, so depending on how quickly he can return for training, that would be a huge matchup. But it's got to be a big fight because, like I said, I think after beating JDS, he's one fight away from fighting for the UFC.
It has to be Arlovsky or a Cain,
especially since Rothwell's booked for JDS in the UFC's first trip to Croatia.
And Stipe is supposedly booked, or at some point will be for Verdum. The only other option I would see,
and you have Mark Hunt already against Frank Mir.
Exactly. And so the only other option I would see is Jared Rosholt. No.
Travis Brown,
Travis Brown, I would see the rematch. That's the one I could possibly see if he doesn't get Cain or Arlovsky. So
either way, it's a good headline having him there.
Yeah, it's a good place to put him over there. I mean, he's got a really strong draw over in that market, and it's just I'm excited just from the be back, but just stay in the UFC.
I am too. And speaking of Sterling, I had a little bit of a feeling that he may more so than Overeem go over to Bellator, because I thought, much like Ben Henderson, he is a guy that maybe could have commanded an immediate title shot in the bantamweight division, but he decided to stay. Now, his contract in terms of money doesn't look that much different, but it's one of those, I guess they kind of mentioned with Ben Henderson, it has a lot of those incentives, which I think with the Reebok deal, you're going to see a lot more in the UFC than you have in the previous Zuffa ownership. And I think he took that and the prestige of fighting in the UFC over maybe a little more upfront cash fighting in Bellator.
I think over in the bantamweight, over in Bellator is not as good at like a division market for him. I mean, he could do
but
well.
There are
over
some
there.
Decent names,
right? Oh, there's some decent names, and I think Sterling would do phenomenal there. But to be over in the UFC's bantamweight, because right now they got a lot of eyes and focus on it with Dominic Cruz coming back and everything.
And of course, the whole thing with Faber and Dillashaw.
And that's the thing. It's like, and if he has a good incentivized contract where it's like getting up to the top, get some more money, that's still a relatively shallow division, enough where he could climb the ranks pretty well. I think out of the three dudes, Benson, Sterling, and Overeem, I think Sterling and Overeem are the two important ones to keep. In my opinion, I like Benson a lot. I love the dude.
Because neither has become champion.
Right. And Benson was a lightweight and welterweight fighter in two divisions that are already completely stacked. Him going over, basically the UFC kind of gave him their blessing anyway. I mean, him going over to the Bellator, he's already a previous champ. It just legitimizes UFC talent anyway. These two guys, they got a lot of draw power still and potential in them, so I'm excited for it.
So Bellator may have lost out on Overeem and Aljamain Sterling, but they get back former UFC light heavyweight champion Quentin Rampage Jackson after a whole lot of contract disputes and whatnot that actually saw the former champ return to the UFC as recent as April of last year. The courts kind of went back on that, and now he is returning to Bellator. I don't know the exact amount of fights. I'm looking here on MMA Junkie. It doesn't say how many fights he would have to fulfill to complete the contract, but however, his next fight and probably his next two fights will be for Bellator. And I think the fight to make immediately is the fight I think they were supposed to have scheduled I almost think his first fight in Bellator, him against Tito.
Yeah, I feel like there's two big fights for him to do in Bellator now, which, I mean, it's not a bad thing for him going back there because the draw power, him and Tito, him and Vanderlei, if Vanderlei doesn't go over to Rizin.
Honestly, even Rampage against Fedor, I don't think is even that bad.
That's not a bad one. And I mean, especially with the Rizin, how open they are with going back and forth with Bellator and everything. I mean, there's a lot of good place for Rampage right now to be one of those old school pride fighters, where I think fighters like that do better in Bellator and Rizin because of the market that Bellator seems to be leaning towards, like these classic freak matches and all these old school guys. That's a good place for Rampage. I want to see him and Tito fight. I don't know if I want to see him fight for a title, just because I feel like I
think he wants to fight for a title.
I feel like it'd just be a waste
fighting.
of his time. Exactly. Yeah. I feel like his best efforts would be do things like Kimbo Slice is doing and just take ridiculously crazy fights. So,
and I would imagine him against Rampage on Spike would do huge numbers. And this is saying as a Rampage Jackson fan.
What now, was Kimbo on Team Rampage, or was he?
Yes, he was. Yeah, in fact, that was Rampage first pick, I believe. On that season of The Ultimate Fighter. So I don't know if he would fight Kimbo, but definitely would fight Tito. Definitely. All right, let's get to some women's MMA news, as Invicta has formally finalized their next event, which will be in Las Vegas at the Tropicana in March. Invicta FC 16 will feature 2 title fights. The main event will be in the Bantamweight division, as former Jules champion. This is not the main event, but former Jules champ Asaki Hamasaki. No, she's the atomweight champ. Boy, I forgot. She beat Turbicchio, who beat Michelle Watterson.
It's been so long since I'm all over the place right now.
It is her first title defense. She will be against Amber Brown. I believe that will be the main event. And then the co-main event will actually be the interim title fight for the flyweight division, as Barb Honchak injured. So Invicta has tabbed Vanessa Porto against Jennifer Maia for the interim flyweight title, which is very surprising to me. I thought Roxanne Modafferi should have gotten, I believe she has a win over Porto, if I'm not mistaken.
She does.
That's a little surprising to me. However, it says that the main reason, not due to injury, I misspoke earlier, is Barb Honchak is moving from her home in the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest, and is also unclear when she will return. I think I've even mentioned this just talking in general, also when we've had our good friend Andrea KGB Lee on, who will also be on this card, I think Barb is thinking about dropping down to 115 and fighting in the UFC. She's showed up usually a couple pounds under the flyweight limit in her title defenses, and I just have a feeling that, to me, that's her future, especially since there's no immediate plans for the UFC to have the flyweight division. Why not try to drop an extra, in her case, like 7-8 pounds, and at least try to make a run in the UFC?
I would like it. Barb Honchak's really good. Actually, I love watching her fight. I mean, on top of that, I think this also goes to just state more about how much I like Invicta. Because just looking at the card, I mean, it's still lined up really well. Deanna Bennett and Roxanne Modafferi,
huge fight. Bennett moving back up to flyweight after her, well, she almost got the Invicta title. I know that weight was a little bit of an issue for her moving back up to 125. She should be refreshed. But Modafferi is a woman who's fought most of her career at 135.
And she's been
very interesting,
really good post UFC.
There's a good chance that the winner of that fights the winner of Porto and Maia. Very real chance, unless of course the aforementioned Andrea KGB Lee does what she's done so far in Invicta and has been nothing short of impressive. She takes on longtime veteran Sarah D'Elio in a matchup in the flyweight division. Also, I think a lot of people will have eyes on this fight in the strawweight division as Alexa Grasso takes on Stephanie Agink. That's a huge matchup, both young, talented women that I think could be stars in the UFC. And
Grasso put a beating out in her last fight.
Very easily, their next fight could be in the UFC. I think the winner almost gets promoted instead of fighting for the Invicta title.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, the women's in Invicta right now, the cards aren't as often as some other divisions or leagues. But every time there's a card, there's just so much talent on the card. It almost just pays to watch the entire thing, prelim and everything, especially the pacing of the card, where it's just fight after fight after fight after fight. They don't put all the ads in the way. They're just streaming through Fight Pass and just getting the fights done. This is absolutely loaded. I mean, I'm excited for it. I love watching Invicta fights.
I think this is way better than Invicta 15. Not to say that Invicta 15 was a horrible card.
It was
I'm saying like
Invicta
this
15
one
was a good card to watch.
Think this one,
but on paper, this just kills it.
In terms of names that Invicta has, this is very close here. And we haven't even mentioned, Jessamine Duke's on the card.
Yeah, Jessamine Duke's on the card.
Former Invicta strawweight champion Turbicchio. She returns as she takes on Jin Yoon Frey. Also, Kelly McGill's on the card. I think this is just going to be an excellent card. And, of course, that is March 11th in Las Vegas, 1 week after 196. So it should be a good one. Real quick, a couple of UFC matchmaking notes. Patrick Cummins will take on Little Nog in Brazil in what should be Fabricio Verdum against Stipe Miocic. Not officially, that fight hasn't been announced, but that looks to be the case. This, I would assume, would be on the main card, with, of course, the co-main event being Jacare against Vitor Belfort.
Yeah, this one right here, I feel like this might be a loser leaves town fight. I think if Nog takes a loss here, he's been fighting way too long.
I think he should definitely retire.
I think regardless, even if he gets a win here, it's just a win over Patrick Cummins. And it's just no offense to Patrick, but Nog, I think it's just time to hang it up almost at that point. I mean, you're putting in way too many hours. We've seen him take too many hard losses. Well, the same thing as his brother. And Patrick, I mean, he gets a loss here. I mean, he's at even in UFC with 4-4 wins. And right now he's at 4-3. You know, if he takes a win, he'll be 5-3. If he takes a loss, I mean, that's 4-4.
Yeah, he'll probably be cut.
Yeah, I mean, and it's no offense to Patrick. He puts the heart out there, but when he comes out, he either looks great, which I think was only like 2 fights, or
right.
You know, he comes out and he just gets toyed and starched. So,
also former World Series of Fighting champion Jessica Aguilar will try to rebound from her loss in her UFC debut to Claudia Gadelha, taking on the tough fighter Juliana Lima, and that will be at UFC 197 in Las Vegas, April 23rd. Of course, the main event, John Jones against DC. Of course, we knew that fight was going to happen. We thought it may happen to Madison Square Garden. Obviously not. So the UFC moved that event to, once again, Las Vegas for that event. And also, real quickly, Ronda Rousey finally, after that ESPN magazine article came out, she opened up a little bit about Holly Holm, but now today on the Ellen DeGeneres talk show on NBC, opened up pretty much as open as we've maybe ever seen the former UFC women's bantamweight champion talking about suicidal thoughts, wanting to not fight anymore, her relationship with Travis Brown. Many things were answered, of course. If you missed it, I'm sure you can catch her on demand, or it's on YouTube now as well, her interview with Ellen. But it's nice to see her finally kind of talk about it. And I feel like whether you're a person that had a traumatic event or you're an athlete trying to get over a failure, that's the best way to get over it, is talking. And I'm not too surprised it took this long, considering how much Ronda keeps things in and has that chip on her shoulder. But I think it's good for her to do this, because to me, you really can't move on whether she's going to continue fighting or not until you kind of admit what was wrong, and then you can get past it. And I think this was a big moment for Ronda, doing it on such a national platform like the Ellen DeGeneres show.
At this point, I mean, in her career, there's no way she can't do anything not on the national platform.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough, but I mean, it's kind of predicted. I mean, after the way Holly Holm just took her out, I mean, I feel like Holly did so much damage to her with the way just beating her like that too. But I'm going to keep saying what I've been saying. I feel like Ronda's not going to come back and fight. I feel like this is the start of that, is where she starts opening up more about how she felt afterwards in the fight and everything. I think she'll start reflecting more about really how that makes her feel and where she wants to go with this. I mean, she mentioned suicide, and then, she struggled with that in her life before, the thoughts of suicide, addiction, things like that. And now she's talking, how the one thing that pulled her through out of it was wanting to have kids and a family with Travis Brown. Which that in itself is a can of worms, since Travis is still married. I'm not here to judge. I'm saying, like, she's in a situation right now where I think she's kind of still a little, I don't want to say cuckoo, but taking a hit like that to your career, not even just the fact that she got knocked out, but just you were on top of the world and you were just brought into nothing and disappeared for 6 months. You kind of be a little bit unstable from that, because she doesn't take losses that well in her career. I feel like this is just her starting to accept that, and I think she just needs to move on from the sport, in my opinion, because coming back, another loss would not do her any good. And I to come back and realize maybe Holly Holm has her number, or even if she comes back and Tate's the champ and she fights Tate, and if she lost to Tate, even it's just like sometimes a fighter loses and they just need to just leave it at that.
What do you think was the worst Rousey performance, fighting against Holly Holm or her hosting duties on SNL?
I mean, at least she took the SNL thing seriously. I mean, I don't think she took the Holly Holm fight seriously, and that's what cost her. So
now, see, to me, that's the real failure they should have talked about on Ellen, was her hosting, because I watch SNL every week, regardless of who's the host. I am a fan of the show. Some people aren't. That's fine. Some people say, oh, it was better back in the day. That's fine. Whatever. I like it all. But they basically hid her as the host. It almost was like she was one of the, they're like featuring, and the guy who's in one skit or says one line and it's not funny. Yeah. That was her. Other than that one pre-recorded skit that they did, I
feel like that's her just dipping her toes, just trying to get herself back into the limelight without being.
But the thing is, I've seen other athletes go on the show before, and they haven't been hidden like that.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, I think that's her just.
That was
after something that big. I think she just needs to slowly bring herself back into the spotlight without being this invincible woman. She has to come out more and now be the humble champ who lost. And like, for her, I think that's something that's probably a little bit different, considering she's never lost as champ. So.
I just had to bring up the SNL thing.
No,
I think
definitely.
we forgot to bring it up, but like, if you watch this past weekend's SNL with Melissa McCarthy, hilarious, good stuff. Anyways, all right, we'll go in order with the weekend's festivities, starting first with Bellator 149 on Friday night, Spike TV. The fight that not too many people asked for, but it's the fight we're getting here in Houston, as Ken Shamrock takes on Hoist Gracie for the third time, as well as a grudge match between former friends Kimbo Slice and Defar Harris, a.k.a. Dada 5000. Also, some real fighters on the card. Emmanuel Newton against Linton Vassell, Emmanuel Sanchez against Daniel Pineda, and round out by Melvin Gillard against Derek Campos. Also, I hope his fight ends up on the main card. We'll see how it all works out. But the big pygmy himself, Justin Bren, taking on Juan Torres. So that one will be the undercard fight to watch. And
full
according
card.
to Bellator or SheerDog.com and their report,
fights.
they list 18 fights, including Shamrock and Giz Gracie. So I tell you what, if you got a ticket to that event in Houston,
you get your money's worth.
You definitely got your money's worth, because I think Bellator usually has their lowest ticket price at $30. So you're almost paying $2 a fight. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
That's not
And
bad.
you got some decent names on this card too. Like, this is a big card, so it's like.
And they had the Fan Fest. I guess technically it'd be Thursday, so that's cool.
Yeah, and like, you look at it, like, there's some guys like they're like no fights whatsoever. So a lot of them just
a
pro
lot
debut.
of Houston guys.
They also make
Texas
something like
guys,
there's a lot of guys who have like more than 10 fights on their record. A lot of them have about 8. But I mean, there's some dudes in here who put some work in. So not a bad card.
Really quickly, we're not going to break down every fight
Right,
statistically, but I think Sanchez, he is a guy that I really think is maybe on the cusp of becoming a star for Bellator here in their featherweight division. After losing, I thought, not a horrible fight, but obviously a really good fighter in Pat Curran, lost a unanimous decision. He has beat Henry Corrales, and I thought a pretty big upset over Justin Lawrence in his last fight back in November, taking on Daniel Pineda, who actually just fought in the main event for Bellator against Josh Thompson. So Pineda moving down, Manuel Sanchez, no Josh Thompson, but I still think if you can beat Daniel Pineda, that's 3 wins in a row. He starts to move up here in a very stacked featherweight division for Bellator. Not to mention that would be his 5th win in the organization. And looking at since coming over to Bellator in October of 2014, he would have won 5 out of his last 6. Like I said, his only loss coming to Pat Curran. He's definitely a guy I think to look out for if he can beat Pineda on Friday.
Yeah, no, I mean, Pat Curran's also not a bad loss either. So
No,
it's like,
not at all.
To have that on there against Daniel Pineda, that's a good step up for Emmanuel. So we could see something good come out of there. We might see Daniel Pineda just bounce back after that Thompson fight, but I'm looking for a star coming out of Emmanuel.
Gallard against Campos, really, this is both guys trying to stay relevant in the lightweight division. Gallard, actually, and Campos both coming off a loss to Brandon Gertz. So trying to get back in the picture. And, of course, Melvin, a little, not quite damaged goods, but obviously disappointing run in the World Series of Fighting. He got destroyed by their champion, Justin Gaethje. Comes over to Bellator. Not as much hype, I think, had he just initially signed with Bellator, and then gets the main event against Brandon Gertz. Everyone think, he should beat Brandon Gertz. Brandon Gertz ends up beating him in the main event. Now he's taking on Derek Campos. Campos, if he can take it to the ground, obviously that's been Melvin's big flaw over his career, is handling wrestlers. I think he has a chance. But if Melvin can keep this thing standing, he definitely has a chance. And I don't think he can beat Will Brooks or Ben Henderson, but I think he can have some interesting matchups at 155 with the likes of Michael Chandler or even a David Rickles. Yeah,
I think at this point in Melvin Gallard's career, he's not going to be winning any championships anytime soon. But he's still an interesting and exciting fighter just to have. Because, I mean, he could really put out some good fights. He's been on, that tough back and forth skid ever since the UFC. And it's rough to see it because he was such a prospect coming in. And it was like he had this huge rise and this fall just ate him alive. But he's still an exciting and fun guy. He's got a lot of fights under his belt. I mean, he's going to go the way of like dudes like Brian Ebersol and whatnot who have like 80, 100 fights, and they're just taking whatever they can because they just like it. So Emmanuel Newton against Linton Vassell, their first fight for the Bellator Light Heavyweight Championship was pretty amazing, as this is awesome.
Vassell had a pretty good opening 2 rounds, but Emmanuel Newton was able to kind of weather the storm and grind out Vassell and eventually got the finish in the 4th round. This one, however, not scheduled for 5, so I think it kind of changes things and it really helps Linton Vassell because he doesn't have to potentially go 25 minutes against Emmanuel Newton, who is a cardio machine. Yeah. So I think the fact it's 3 rounds even makes it more exciting because Emmanuel Newton knows that he can't fall down 2 rounds like he did the last fight. So Emmanuel Newton fighting with a sense of urgency we've never really seen before. And obviously the way he lost his last fight in Bellator's Dynamite tournament to Phil Davis didn't go very well. So it's interesting to see how he comes out trying to reclaim his Bellator light heavyweight championship. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to watch Emmanuel fight just mainly because he's the one who got me started on that whole dad strength thing. And I've seen him live. Fortunately, when I saw him live, I watched him lose, but I was voting for Liam anyway. But I think since he has such good cardio, I think just 3 rounds is just going to let him put a little bit more urgency into his fight. He's still got power that comes out of nowhere.
And that's the weird thing about Manuel is either he's going to come in and kind of grind, or he's just randomly going to hit you with something.
Yeah, he's going to throw something you don't expect.
And then you're just lights like stutter, and then you're just down. Linton's a great fight. I mean, it's a lot of fun the first time those two fought, and so this second one it's going to be a fireworks show. It's just really who's going to put the urgency out. Both of them can go 3 rounds. Both of them have power, and both of them have technique. I think it's going to be a good old slugfest, actually. I think it's a good one to get us set for the co-main and main tonight. So.
All right. Now, because these are not like I consider real Bellator fights, they're fights to bring in viewers, which is fine. Some people are making fun of it, saying, oh, this shouldn't happen. How can Bellator do this? But at the end of the day, Bellator is a business trying to make money. If more people are watching the product, that's more money from advertisers and sponsors and all yada yada.
There's a market for these fights,
so I have no problem with it.
Right?
Maybe it's a little shy and whatnot,
but there's a market for them, and Bellator sees the moment.
At the end of the day,
someone has to do it.
At the end of the day, these guys signed on to do it.
I'd rather Bellator snatch up these opportunities than some like tiny little regional circuit. You know, like because right now those are things that I would like to watch. Yeah, they're freak shows. But I'd rather, like, if I know UFC ain't going to do it, Bellator should do it.
Right. And my question, because these, again, I don't consider them real Bellator fights. They're not moving the organization. They're grabbing ratings.
Right.
That's all fine and dandy. But which fight do you think is going to be a bigger train wreck? The fight that you just watched and go, wow, that these were professionals? You know, that you make your re-question.
Definitely the main event.
You think so?
Well, so I think I want to start with saying the co-main, I feel like won't be too bad. It's Kimbo Slice. He's weird. But I think Dada, I mean, he still has a lot to prove kind of thing. I think he's the one who's actually like the freshest of the fighters because he's like the youngest. And so he's got a lot going on for him and everything. And so he's got that uprising. But Ken and Hoist, like, they've been around for so long. So they got like, oh, man, these legends. That's what people are going to be seeing. It's like, I remember those back in the 90s and all that stuff. I remember all that. Let's watch it. And people are going to see and be reminded that the 90s was not 10 years ago. It was 20.
Right.
And they're going to see these two flop around, and it's probably invariably going to end up on the ground. And it's just going to be
both guys are. That's
the thing is, I don't think Hoist is going to be as quick or as good off his back as he was 20 years ago.
And I think the size difference, as much as it was apparent then, obviously Gracie with more skill, but by this time, Shamrock has enough. There's nothing crazy, I think, that Gracie has up his bag at 48 that Ken now at 51.
Yeah, this isn't like two dads getting a fight at the parent-teacher conferences. All right, these are like two senior citizens fighting over the last rice pudding. All right, and so I mean, I'll watch it because they're parts of history, but I'm not saying I'm going to watch it for flair or like what's going to be like insane. It's just going to be like, oh man, who's going to pull something weird off?
Right. I think Kimbo Dada is going to be a little more of a train wreck because if these dudes do not knock each other out in the first like minute and a half, it's going to be like Ben Rothwell against Mark Hunt. You know, just sloppy, just haymakers and hoping they land, and just two big sweaty dudes. I think what
saves it from being too bad is just because it's billed as the co-main. If they were the main event, I could definitely see the train wreck being worse because they're being touted.
That's why it is the co-main and not the main event on its own.
Yeah, so we'll see. It's weird nonetheless.
All right, let's get to Saturday's fight, World Series of Fighting. And guess what? They actually have people we heard of this time.
Hey, I know it's nice and easy for us.
What are the chances that World Series of Fighting actually had people we heard of, capped off by arguably the best fighter World Series of Fighting has on their roster,
right?
In Marlon Moraes, as he once again sets to defend his bantamweight championship, this time against Joseph Barajas. Also, you have Tumenor Valiov. He had a great debut in World Series of Fighting. He's taking on Chris Gutierrez, and also former Ultimate Fighter contestant Jamie Yeager.
I haven't seen Jamie Yeager in a while.
I haven't seen him in a while. He's taking a guy by the name of Tom Gloudman. And also, I think this is at maybe heavyweight. Andrew Ram against Ozzy Valares rounds out the main.
At least everyone on the shirt has like a profile picture, so at least they're like names.
And at least it's not at a huge arena that they don't have to be as empty like they did the FedEx Forum. This will be at the Next Level Sports Complex in Garden Grove, California, wherever that is.
All right, that's where their local hockey team plays for sure.
Probably some minor league hockey team plays there. That sounds exactly like where a minor league hockey
pretty
team
much
would play.
Right. So hey, I mean, it's just another one from Marlon. You know, we'll see how Jamie Yeager does.
He's worth watching.
Marlon's worth watching, and he's the only one, if anything, probably.
Speaking of going to Bellator, I mean, or UFC. I wish Marlon could somehow like buy his way out of his contract because I feel like he's just wasting his time. He's just so much.
I know
better than
it's
these
tough
guys.
when you see guys who are like really talented,
And
and then
it's-
they sign like a 5-year contract or like a 10-fight
and
contract.
you're like, what?
And I'm like, why are you there for
Yeah.
so
So
long? Like,
hopefully Marlon can fight some better guys.
yeah,
Because
so.
no
But
offense to Braz, maybe he pulls the upset, but I don't.
I think World Series realizes that
good.
like they only have like a few big names, so most of their funding is probably poured in the Marlins contract.
Mhm.
So
All right, real quickly before we get to Sunday's UFC fight and get to picks for that as well. Quick replacement: Augusto Mendez will now fight Cody Garbrandt. Originally supposed to be John Lineker. Mendez is a solid opponent, but it loses a little something because Lineker, of course, moved up to 35. I thought had a huge win in his debut against Francisco Rivera. Now taking on the next guy for Team Alpha Male in terms of their young guys moving forward. So I thought that was a big fight. Kind of proves whether Garbrandt is legit in the division. Not say Mendez can't do that for him, but people may, well, I beat a guy in a week's notice. Like,
so John Lineker and
unfortunate,
Garbrandt was a good fight.
I'm glad they're able to keep it because even though it's not in his hometown of Cleveland, Pittsburgh's pretty close. He's going to have a lot of family there, so it would have been disappointing to not have
which I think is a big motivating factor is to make sure they don't get refunds on those tickets. But I mean, it sucks because I wanted Garbrandt to get some good challenge going on and everything because he's like an up and coming name, but he doesn't fight often enough to keep have an opponent pull out of caliber. So it's a bummer, but Mendez is 5-0. We'll see what happens.
All right, we'll get to his fight in the bantamweight division in just a minute, but starting first with the first matchup in lightweight, James Krause against Shane Campbell. Of course, Krause coming off a win over Darren Cruikshank, submitting him in the first round. His opponent in Shane Campbell, not as experienced, 12-3 to 22-7 for James Krause, but the Canadian so far in the UFC has run a 1-1 record. His loss coming by way of knockout to John Medeski back at 186, but he was able to defeat Elias Silveiro back in August at the fight night there in Saskatoon. Campbell, 6 foot, so normally Krause has the advantage, him being 6 foot as well, but this time a little negated by the Canadian. But I think the experience and I think just the overall game of James Krause, I think he's a very well-rounded individual. And I think Krause has also taken on the tougher competition in his career. Not saying Campbell can't win, but just kind of looking over his fights and record, one of those things where I don't think he's going to be. I can't find an area where I think he can have an advantage against James Krause.
James Krause is really well seasoned. He's actually shown his grit in the division. He's his last fight. It kind of really opened my eyes. Like, okay, James Krause is kind of like a shark. Like, he's not like
and
out
his,
there.
Jamie Varner fight as well,
right? And this thing, like, he has losses on his fight. But I mean, he's losing to guys like Jorge Masvidal, Bobby Green. Like,
he's also beaten Sam Stout.
Right.
Well,
he's fighting decent dudes, but like, I mean, his last fight with Darren, even though I'm a big Darren Cruikshank fan supporter, Krause came out there and he still looked good. But like you said, he's given up that size advantage that he normally has against this guy because they're both kind of roughly the same height and everything. So we'll see how it plays out. But an extra 2 inches doesn't cut it as much as sometimes when you got an extra 4.
6'2". I thought he was just 6 foot, but 6'2". Yeah, he's definitely like one of the biggest.
He's a tall lightweight. But normally he runs like a 4-inch advantage.
Yeah.
So
but at 6 foot, like I said,
that's at that point, it's almost like it just tapers off. So we'll see. He's still a game.
I think it's going to be a good fight, though.
I think it'll be.
I haven't seen a boring James Krause fight.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, James Krause is like
in any fight. He's win or lose.
Fun to watch. So.
All right. Let's. Speaking of usually pretty entertaining, Joe Diesel Riggs returns to the middleweight division as he takes on. Boy, I don't know what to call him. Kind of the Rudy of the UFC here.
Oh man,
Chris Camuzzi,
the Reddit MMA warrior guy.
He beat Tom Watson though in his return to the UFC after a couple fights out. He kind of had that short notice rematch against Jacare, which you see on the poster back there. Got dominated again. They gave him Tom Watson. Tom Watson, I thought was a solid middleweight. He was able to get by him. Now taking on the Diesel at 185. The one thing about the Diesel at 185 as opposed to 170. Not going to be as physically strong, but the fact he doesn't have to cut as much weight, the power is even more prevalent in this division. So you see a little different Joe Riggs, and that's where you see, 20 knockouts out of 41 victories. You see a lot more of those knockouts he's gotten in the middleweight division because he doesn't have to, he can get them later. It's not like his power fades as much in the middleweight division. So Chris Camuzzi, he's got to stay moving and make Joe work because even though he has less weight to cut, that's still his Achilles heel because he's such a muscle-bound dude. And Kamuzi's a guy that's, he's a good-sized middleweight, at 6'3", but that's kind of one is kind of outworking people, and he has to outwork Joe Riggs because if he goes in there, tries to grapple, get in close, or make this a slugfest, I don't think he can win those ways. But if he can stay on the outside, move around, play angles, kind of frustrate Joe Riggs, those are ways he can win.
Yeah, I think the Chris Camozzi's comeback after he was cut and then he got the chance to fight in the UFC again, he's shown that he kind of had a chance to really pace himself and grow. I mean, his losses aren't horrible losses though either. I mean, he's fighting big names right now, middleweight. But I mean, even coming back to UFC, I've seen that he changed as a fighter, especially to come back and just fight, Ronaldo Souza on like late notice. Like, come on, So he's a decent fighter. He's only lost 2 big good names. That's the thing. Kyle Noak, Francis Carmon, Jacare twice, Rafael Natal, Bruno Santos, like Lorenz Larkin. Like, those are good names that if you take a loss to, you learn from. So we'll see how he does against a guy like Joe Riggs, who's just so experienced. I mean, this dude's been around forever, it feels like. I mean, he's
only 33. That's the crazy thing.
It's the crazy thing because he looks like he's been around since the dawn of time.
Right.
But we'll see. Camozzi has a little bit of a height advantage, but at that point in that weight, Joe Riggs, this is where his bread and butter is at.
This will be entering his 15th year as a professional MMA fighter.
I mean, and this dude's fought all over the place right now.
He's pretty much fought in every organization ever in the United States, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and then you look at like his losses. Even then, he's got like some losses.
He's fought in like
you
King
can't
of the
scoff at
Cage,
those.
Ring of the Cage, WEC, IFC, XFC, UFC, WC, Strikeforce.
Right, some guy's backyard.
I think probably. I think the only major organization he didn't fight in was like Pride.
Right.
I think that's about it.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
He's fought in everywhere else, so
yeah,
should be fun. The Diesel's been out of action for a while after he hurt his. He
shot himself in the hand.
His neck with the Patrick Cote thing,
and
then he had that disqualification against Ron Stallings that was all the way in September. Kind of bad. It was really like 3. He had the Saunders thing, then the loss against Cote, and then the DQ thing. So his last 3 fights have kind of been a little fluky, almost. So
right, and
I'm interested to see what happens this time.
People have been waiting for him to hype back up, but.
All right, let's get to that aforementioned Cody Gambrandt fight. The next prospect here for Team Alpha Male, 7-0, taking on now 5-0 Augusto Mendez, who great submission guy so far here. The former Legacy champion, 4 of 5 wins by submission. The 32-year-old Brazilian taking on the young gun from Ohio, now training with Team Alpha Male out there in Sacramento.
Is that Paige Van Zandt?
Much, I don't think they're going out anymore, but they were at one point. But kind of a different style. 6 of 7 wins by knockout.
Yeah.
So with the short notice, obviously you got to say Gambrandt has to keep it standing, and Mendez wants to try to scramble and
when
grab
you
a
see
leg
those
of
matchups,
Gambrandt
then you always know
to the ground. And especially in a weak notice, you get about as close as you can to just 2 dudes. Like, hey, let's see what happens.
Yeah. So it's a weird fight because Garbrandt, he's really good with those weird kicks, and he likes to keep
preparing for a much different
fight. Like he likes to keep his distance. So he'll pick on a guy and like hit him off and everything. And he's obviously familiar with wrestlers and takedowns come from Alpha Male. Being said, though, his fighting style, it still leaves him open that if he does get taken down, he's fighting a guy who's legit on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and he can't afford to risk it at this early in his career and everything. That kind of stuff's easy to kind of
like we said, the pressure kind of. Not exactly his hometown, but maybe the closest it'll be in a very long time. Fighting just outside of Cleveland.
Yeah.
For some of his career now in Pittsburgh. So, maybe the pressure's on him too. You got to factor in he's never fought.
He's one of those young guys
with this big a crowd. With family. And stuff,
this early in the career. So I mean, he has everything to lose here. So.
All right, the next fight, really, I think should be an interesting fight as Kawajiri takes on Dennis Bermudez. Bermudez is one of those guys. There's this. Kind of ran out of some bad luck there, was on the cusp of a UFC title shot after winning like 7 fights in a row, then got finished and back-to-back fights to top 10 fighters in Ricardo Lamas and Jeremy Stevens, despite being in both those fights up until the finish. Now taking on longtime veteran, speaking like Joe Riggs, very similar guy in Kawajiri, who so far has kind of been home so far since finally coming over to the UFC. He's won 3 out of his 4 in the organization. in a battle of grinder versus grinder, he lost to Clay Guida, but so far has defeated Dennis Seaver and Jason Knight since. However, much like Guida, a great wrestler is Dennis Bermudez, and I don't think Kawajiri will be able to do that. And Dennis Bermudez, he may not be the most technical guy, but he hits hard. He's a tough out, and he's a guy that I think can finish in a couple of different areas. And I think he's going to make Kawajiri work, who has shown that his conditioning is not the greatest. And I think that's a big advantage for Bermudez, who has been in wars and has gone for 15 minutes against some top guys in this division. And not to mention, Bermudez needs to win. Like I said, he had a really nice winning streak there. Now 2 straight losses. I think he kind of needs this win to stay relevant in this stacked featherweight division.
Yeah, for him, it's got to be do or die. I mean, I don't think he's going to get cut. But nonetheless, I mean, a 3-fight losing streak in the featherweight division is going to be rough for you when so much is happening at the top right now. You need to get as much momentum to thrust yourself in there. But, you know, Kawajiri, I mean, he's experienced. He's probably fought a couple wrestlers, you know, other than Guida in his time. So he probably knows what's what. I mean, look at even his record, 12 KOs, 10 submissions, 12 decisions. He knows where to take a fight, and he knows how to have it happen. So, you know, we'll see here. He might be able to dictate it really well. At the same time, Dennis Bermudez puts on a really crazy pace. He's one of those guys who's just, you know, he's in, he's out, and then he's just going to pop you with something, or he's just going to pull you to the ground, and you're just going to have a rough night. But, I mean, we'll see. We thought he was doing great in his last fight, and then look what happened. So.
Getting to the co-main event of the evening will be in the middleweight division, as Derek Brunson is taking on Ronan Canero. This is actually a pivotal fight in the division. The winner definitely moves up the middleweight rankings. Both are on nice streaks. Brunson winning his last 3 fights, beating the likes of Lorenz Larkin, Ed Herman, and Sam Alvey. Whereas Canero, he has been on a run, as I mentioned, beating the... Actually, well, if you go back non-UFC, he's won his last 6 fights in a row. He beat Brock Larson, who actually was in the UFC at one time, so that's kind of a good victory. And then in his, I believe this was his return to the UFC after getting cut back in 2008, he defeated Mark Munoz, submitting him in the first round. So Canero versus Brunson, 2 guys kind of towards the bottom of the top 15, top 20. Really can make a splash in this division with a win here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Brunson's one of those guys. He's been there's a lot of clamor around him and everything. A lot of people want to see him do really well and get up there. So I mean, and this is a chance for him just to keep that win streak going. He's on a guy who's got a solid win streak of his own right now professionally. And so Brunson just needs to come here and just do what he's been doing. It's just getting these wins, you know. But this has been the theme all night. It's young bloods up against these guys who got, you know, tons of experience. I mean, Canero's been, you know, back and forth with the UFC and other professional leagues pretty much his entire professional career. I mean, he's 37 years old. He's from Top Team, and he's fought dudes like Rio Chonin and John Fitch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and I think that's with the Lima brothers train. Yeah,
so he's up against a really, you know, I mean, this guy's even fought Anderson Silva back in the day, 2002. I mean, that's not saying Anderson Silva passed on his gift to him, but I was just saying, this guy's been in there with really good, decent fighters. And so it's just, once again, another test for Brunson. A win here for either guy is good for them, though. So,
and Brunson, again, a lot of hype because of that Sam Alvey victory. And I think he has to keep it standing. Even though Brunson has a good wrestling background, Canero has a lot of submission victories. In fact, half his wins are by submission. So I don't know how much you want to tempt fate.
Right.
I mean, he already said Mark Munoz was a good wrestler too. He submitted him in one round.
So
that might not
that's
be
intense.
something you want to mess around with.
And Munoz still, you know, even though I feel like he's kind of old and everything, he still has power in his hand. So
most certainly he did in that matchup. To the main event, the Battle of the Cowboys, is the Brazilian cowboy Alex Oliveira filling in for the aforementioned Tim Means, the Dirty Bird, after a USADA notice that he will be suspended. Not officially, but that gave the UFC kind of the go-ahead to find someone else, and they found the Brazilian Cowboy to fill in against the American Cowboy. Donald Cerrone moving up to 170 for this matchup after just losing a shot in the lightweight division for the title against Rafael Dos Anjos. Not one to rest on victory or defeat, the Cowboy getting right back into action. Oliveira definitely a bright prospect. His last fight, I believe I even recorded it on my Instagram because I thought his knockout was that good down in Brazil, knocking out Peter Hallman in the third round. And really, since a come from behind loss to Gilbert Burns in his UFC debut back in March of last year, he has since won 3 straight fights, fighting 4 times in 2015. So much like his Cowboy counterpart, also a guy that likes to get back in that, beating some solid names, KJ Noons, Joe Mara, and Peter Hallman, finishing 2 out of those 3 gentlemen.
He's got fights like Cerrone.
You know, he is a big guy too. 5'11". He was a big guy for lightweight. So to me, it's not that much of a difference that he's moving up to welterweight. In fact, I actually think it helps out the Brazilian Cowboy more so than it does Cerrone.
Yeah.
And I think the big difference is Cerrone's a little more technical. He's not really a one-punch guy. Of course, when he usually knocks people out, it's with kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all fine and dandy, but I think the Cowboy has more raw, unbridled power. And at 170, I think he can let it fly in more. But I think if the Brazilian Cowboy doesn't catch him early in those first 2 rounds and Cerrone gets into that rhythm, leg kicking, switching up high, switching low, using
he'll just take you to the schoolyard and beat you around.
I think he'll either eventually wear him down to a knockout or get a 5-round unanimous decision. So I think that's the key. I think Oliveira kind of not quite go for broke in the first round, but I think by round 2, I think he's got to just go for it because I don't see him lasting 25 minutes with Cerrone.
Yeah, there's a certain pace you got to fight certain fighters with, and I think this might be covered in camps, and it's just like there's like a wave you kind of like you got to follow and the pace of your fights and based on how many rounds you have, who you're fighting. Donald Cerrone, to fight him, you kind of got to have all your output be in that first round or 2. Cerrone is a notorious slow starter when it comes to fighting, and he's admitted this himself, and he just refuses to address it, it seems. And you can see in Cerrone's latest loss, he just got swarmed early out, and that cost him. And so to really have an effect on Cerrone is you got to come out quick. You got to come out early. It's put a lot of pressure on him. Even if you don't take him out then, you might be able to win 2 rounds, and that could put some pressure on him to do well those last 3. Cerrone, though, once he gets comfortable and he's established his range and how you're going to react to his feints, he's just going to take you out and just beat you around. And he's shown that a lot when like his fights before his title fight, where you just want, if you want to wait it out with him and everything, he will take you, and then he'll wait and he'll just pick you off meticulously and know where you're at. And it's just these guys, they have a similar fighting style, and they're both big finishers, but Cerrone, he cracks under the early pressure. Cowboy, first of all, I didn't even know there's cowboys in Brazil.
Usually you hear that in Argentina.
Yeah, I don't know.
With the gauchos.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
But that's Brazil. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't even know.
South
anyway.
America.
So, I mean, it's just going to come down to experience. Cerrone's got a bunch of experience. Oliveira, I mean, 5 of his latest fights, I think, even 6, whatever, they were all last year. Even before he got in the UFC, he had like a fight. So, we'll see what happens here. They both have a big output, these 2 fighters.
I think the X factor is the submissions of Cerrone. As I mentioned, the one loss that the Brazilian Cowboy has in the UFC was by submission. Cowboy actually has the majority of his wins by submission. So if there's some type of scramble or if it goes to the ground,
he's good on the ground.
Definitely,
and
with
especially
Cerrone.
at welterweight, he's such a lean dude as is at lightweight. And welterweight, he's just going to be able to almost just be a little bit more muscular, but he's going to be kind of nice and comfy up at that weight class, I think, for submissions to be rolling around off his back. So
let's get to picks for UFC Fight Night 83, Cowboy versus Cowboy. First fight of the night, lightweight division, James Krause against Shane Campbell. I think Shane Campbell will do a little better than most people think, but I got to go with the James Krause for the victory.
I got to go with Krause. I've liked what he's looked like in his past few fights. So
Joe Riggs against Chris Camuzzi. I don't know if it's technically an upset, but I think most people, just because of experience and prestige, would perceive Camuzzi as the underdog. And I'm going to go with Chris Camuzzi. I just think that he's going to bounce around and kind of frustrate Joe Riggs and somehow eke out a decision.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go with the Chris also. Joe Riggs just hasn't really had that moment to establish a good rhythm win-wise. So
Cody Garbrandt against Augusto Mendez. I think if this was the original scheduled fight, I would maybe even pick Mendez, but I think weak notice against a guy like Garbrandt, who so far has been on fire since coming to the UFC. Like I said, fighting I think a guy who's been training with Alpha Male will be ready for fighting. Maybe the pressure of his hometown, so to speak, or near his hometown. So give me no love for the victory.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take Cody as well, just because he trains with wrestlers constant. I think he'll be ready to even on last week notice for a ground fighter.
Dennis Bermudez against Tasui Karajeri. Dennis Bermudez. I'm not going to even really hesitate on that one or build it up. I just think
Dennis
Bermudez is better.
Yeah, Dennis the Menace, he's got too much quickness.
Derek Brunson against Honan Canero. I think Canero has a shot, but I'm a big Sam Alvey fan as well as you, Colin, and the fact that he was able to kind of almost go toe-to-toe and knock out a guy like Sam Alvey in the first round to me was very impressive, and I think he'll be able to roll that momentum into Pittsburgh and take out Canero.
I'm also going to have to go with Brunson. I mean, like you've said it all. Brunson, he's got that good, nice and patient, waited out, but he'll brawl you style. So
I would like to pick the Brazilian Cowboy just because it would be like a huge upset and he would be the rightful heir to the Cowboy nickname. But the original Cowboy, the OG, fighting at that BMF ranch, I got to go with Donald Cerrone in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my theme and not take the last-minute picks, and I'm going to go with Donald Cerrone. So.
All right, he is Colin Camper. He runs our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. As announced on our Facebook page, of course, we want to wish our condolences to the friends and family of former UFC heavyweight champion Kevin Randleman. He unfortunately passed away this past week. I believe it was heart failure due to complications from pneumonia.
Exactly.
Was the official cause of death. 44 years old, was the former heavyweight champion. 17-6, he ends his career. And I said on my Twitter as well as my Instagram, and you look at a record, you say 17-16, but what this guy was able to
what
do,
those 17-16 were.
He is no doubt a legend of the sport because of the moments he had. It wasn't a guy that just simply. No, he got to 17-16, and he just happened to win the UFC title.
This guy was a pioneer.
Skating by or anything like that. And I really hope, and not just simply because now he has passed, but I legitimately hope that the UFC has him in the Hall of Fame come UFC 200.
Definitely.
I think he is deserving of being in that hall.
I feel like there's a lot of pioneer fighters who deserve it, and definitely Kevin Randleman. I mean, he's been around back since when I was eating dirt. This guy, he was definitely a legend. I hope to see something actually important scientifically and medically come. Maybe if he donates his brain to science, just because there's a lot of talk on the CTE, everything from concussions and fighters. He's a dude who took a lot of brawls. I hope they actually get something, out of his death. As weird as it is to say, just to help with all that research and study, because you don't have a lot of fighters right now who have taken damage that much where you can really study them so actively as you would an autopsy. So,
and I think also he was one of the first big African American stars.
Oh yeah,
for
yeah,
the UFC
he was definitely a big
well. And I think that was big in helping the promotion of the organization at the time in the pre-Zuffa era. And of course, his moments in pride, knocking out Mirko Cro Cop in the Grand Prix, and then even though he lost the Slam. Almost heard around the world with him against Fedor Emelianenko fight. He almost actually won because of that. And of course, he had great battles with Wanderlei Silva and of course Quentin Rampage Jackson, Randy Couture, just to name a few. So definitely our condolences to the family of Mr. Randleman. You will be missed, the monster, Kevin Randleman. Also, I want to thank our partners at MMAsignatures.com, MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net, MMAfreak.com. And last but not least, our biggest news of the week, we will be going to Glory next weekend in Chicago. Super excited. Of course, if you didn't hear the news, Glory's full fight catalog as well as the undercard for Glory 26 in Chicago will be exclusively on the UFC Fight Pass. And you're getting treated on the Fight Pass portion of the card. You think, oh, just going to have some nobodies you never heard of. Well, you get arguably the greatest American kickboxer right now in Stitch 'em Up. Joe Schilling will be fighting as the main event of the Fight Pass card. And then the main card, just switch over your computer, the next browser.
Right,
ESPN 3,
done.
you get to see a middleweight tournament plus Simon Marcus against Artem Levin 3 for the Glory Middleweight Championship. Super excited that we'll get to go there and watch it. We've never been to a kickboxing event. And I'm just super stoked, and especially Joe Schilling added to the card. Of course, we've had him on the show. Hopefully have him on again. But I'm really excited. And they even made Glory Chicago, I think, bigger than it already was.
Right. I mean, it's going to be a fun event. I've never been to like hardly any events. I've been like maybe 3 or 4, but for a kickboxing event, super exciting. It's an awesome card. I mean, I'm really just ready to go, just watch some good fights and just come back and talk about it. So.
All right, he is Colin Camper, as I mentioned, running a Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. I'm your host, Jim Graham. Follow me on Twitter @JimGraham. And thank you once again to listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.